Hi, I'm Raymond Simonson. I'm the CEO of JW3, London's Jewish Community Centre and the UK's only Jewish arts and culture venue of its kind. Sadly, as you know, we've had to temporarily close our doors at the moment. We've got to think about people's health and safety, and we're listening to government advice. But just because we've stopped doing what we normally do in the way that we do it, it doesn't mean we have to completely stop what we're doing and what we're best at. And that is to increase the quality, variety, and volume of Jewish conversation in London and beyond. So we've got some treats for you. We are going to put on a whole load of our digital archive that we've been building up over the last 6 years of some amazing events. We're going to make them absolutely free of charge to you. And whilst you sit down with a cup of tea and put your feet up and watch this amazing thing you're about to see now, our team are going to be planning for a whole bunch of events that we're going to put on digitally over the coming months. For now, this one's on us, it's free. But you know, everything that we do costs money. And at the moment, we don't have the same income streams that we've got. So if you can spare a few pennies, a few shekels, if you can click donate online, that'll be really wonderful. We'd be so grateful for it. If you can do that, that's great. But either way, please sit back and enjoy. We'll see you again soon.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening and welcome. My name is Dina Bernikov. I was born in St. Petersburg, Russia, raised in Israel, educated in America, and for the past 6 years have been raising my family here in London. And just as our two distinguished guests for tonight, I'm a proud Russian-speaking Jew. A few years ago, together with my friend Anna Gluchovsky, I established Arbuz Project. It's a creative studio for Russian language, culture, and intellectual engagement for adults and children alike, which serves, in large part, Russian-speaking Jews who live here in the Greater London area. Inspired and supported by one of our hosts tonight, Genesis Philanthropy Group, our programs now also feature opportunities for our participants to learn about their Jewish roots and get immersed in Russian Jewish culture. Genesis Philanthropy Group, a private foundation created by the vision and generously funded by one of our guests for tonight, Mikhail Fridman, and his partners, represents a unique effort to help Russian-speaking Jews connect with their ethnic, cultural, and spiritual legacy, enhance their Jewish identity, and raise their profile in Jewish communities, and to do it on a global scale. Basically, everywhere where Russian-speaking Jews reside today, in Israel, America, former Soviet Union, Germany, and now the United Kingdom. In the United Kingdom, Genesis Philanthropy Group aims not only to help Russian-speaking Jews living here to embark or continue on their Jewish journeys, but also to leverage resources and expertise which it gained in its global endeavors to help UK Jewish organizations connect with hard-to-reach and under-engaged Jews who live here in Great Britain, regardless of their backgrounds or which language they happen to speak in their homes. It is with this in mind that Genesis Philanthropy Group has just announced 2 significant grants in the United Kingdom aimed to assist 2 leading global Jewish projects, Moshe House and PG Library, to expand their work in London and beyond. And from what I understand, there's definitely more to come. Programs like these were not available when Mikhail and Natan forged their Jewish identities in the former Soviet Union. In fact, at that time, programs like these were simply impossible to think about. And yet, we'll have very soon in front of us 2 remarkable individuals who grew up as one-of-a-kind Jewish leaders. Both set and achieved goals that seemed impossible at the time. Both made significant impact on the world and on the Jewish people. And both cared deeply about the future of the Jews, future of the Jewish state, and future of the ties between Israel and the diaspora. Their conversation tonight promises to be very, very special. With that, please allow me to present our esteemed chair, Mr. James Harding, a director of news and current affairs at BBC, and before that, the editor of the Times of London. Please welcome and enjoy your evening.
and welcome, and it's wonderful to be here. And as Raymond, the Executive Director, can tell you, we are all genuinely lucky to be here. This is one of those events where it was incredibly hard to get a ticket. And so once you get home, do call everyone who didn't make it and tell them what happened. I have to tell you, I personally feel extremely emotional this evening being here. When I was a young boy, an old family friend of ours, a man called Alan Howard, much missed, was a great campaigner for refuseniks. And as a young boy, I got given a sticker that I proudly put on my bike, which said, "Who is Anatoly Sharansky?" and I had, if I remember, a chopper, so it had quite a large mainframe, but not big enough, of course, to take the name Sharansky. So I was cycling around West London with something that said, "Who is Atol Harank?" And of course, the truth is, it was, I think, for many people in this audience, Natan, one of the galvanizing experiences of our lives, recognizing what a victim of injustice you had been, and a campaign for civil rights and freedom that you, but not only you, so embodied. And so it is a great privilege, I think, for many of us here to have you here tonight, knowing the 9 years you spent in prison, so you're saying the 9 years that you spent as a member of the government in the Knesset, and the 9 years you've now spent in the Jewish Agency. I should tell you that the thing that you'll hear about Michael Fridman is that he is, for all of his extraordinary business success and wealth, a very, very laid-back, low-key guy. Like, you're very likely to bump into him on the tube. You're less likely to bump into him being interviewed. And given the extraordinary range of things that he's done, as a businessman setting up Alpha Bank, as an investor in TNK BP, as now the co-founder of Letter One, as one of the really important Jewish and international philanthropists, as we've heard, as the head of Genesis Philanthropy Capital and the Genesis Prize. It is an extraordinary thing for me to be here sitting, interviewing not just Natan Sharansky, but Michael Fridman too. And I can't help feeling that I have the journalistic equivalent of the 31 bus problem. You wait for ages and then two come along at once. So we are going to try and do what seems like a difficult thing to do, which is try and address some really big ideas, given that both men are engaged in some really big ideas, but also try and think through some world affairs, and then throw it open so that I know that many people here will have questions for both men, and so I hope that we will have time for all things. This is the Jewish Community Centre, so we will end at 8-ish, and I hope that people will be happy to sit around for a little longer. Can I start with both of you? A question, I suppose, that is the right one to be asking here at JW3. As you know, it was created, it was founded by Vivian Duffield around a notion of Jewish identity and a sense of belonging. And for both of you, given the lives you've led, I'd be really interested to ask, where do you think you belong?
Well, for me it's very simple. I was born in Ukraine, Russia, Donetsk, Stalingrad. Then was not debated between Russia and Ukraine, but was really a mix of Russians and Ukrainians. I was one of many absolutely assimilated Jews who felt that we are part of Jewish, Russian people. That we are really, my language is Russian, my literature that I love is Russian, culture is Russian, history is Russian, and there is nothing Jewish except from anti-Semitism in my life. And anti-Semitism was very strong, both in the street and in the state, and all the conversation at home, that because you're a Jew, because you have this disease called Jew, you must be the best in your class, in physics, mathematics, music, chess, doesn't matter what. You must be number one, because that's the way how we Jews survive as Russians. So, and I tried very hard to survive as proud Russian Jew, with this name, the idea of your parent Jew, it had no practical meaning, until 1967, when everybody looked at me and said, how your soldiers could do it in Six-Day War. And you understand, your friends and your enemies all think that you are part of them, of these soldiers. And that's when I started reading in the underground from the books which were brought by Jewish tourists. And suddenly I find out that if only I will decide, make some twist in my mind, my history can be not beginning from October Revolution and will be full of all this awful repressions and blood and so on, but my history can start from Exodus from Egypt and to go all the way through to Exodus of Leonuris. And that's when I realized that there is history that I want to be part of. There are all these Jewish tourists who are coming and they say, oh, your father is from Odessa, my father is also from Odessa, and we are family. You find out that all these Jewish people, they are all from Odessa, and they are family. And there is state of Israel, whether you want or not, but everybody thinks that that's your state, and this state is ready to help you. So that's how, from that moment I understood that I want to be Jew, and yes, now I know where I belong to Jewish people, but I am very proud also of the Russian culture and all the other cultures which we are on the way, we Jewish people collected here.
Michael, how do you think your identity?
I would say it's very similar to what Natan said right now. I grew up in a very secular family, and my family never ever talked about any religious holidays or rituals or things like that. Fortunately or unfortunately, state reminded us that we are Jews every single day, because they defined very precisely where we should go, whether we should go to this university or it's prohibited, you should go to this job or it's prohibited for you. And since the beginning it was clear that we have a lot of limitations and boundaries because of our religion. And exactly as Natan said, my mother told me every single day that you should remember that you should be 5 times better than whoever else to achieve the same result. And that's very common here, I mean, Jewish mother all around the globe, So
not in Israel. In Israel, we don't have to be number one.
That's a problem. So I would say so. And when, fortunately, I'm much younger than Natan. By the way, Natan just turned 7 years 2 days ago. Happy birthday.
I'm much younger than 30.
So actually, and we've been lucky that Mr. Gorbachev became a president and started to liberalize life in the Soviet Union, and it was permitted to travel, to do the business, and so on and so forth. And that was probably the time when I started to read the book, because it was almost impossible to read Torah, for instance, during the Soviet time. For instance, growing up in Lvov, where is one of the most Jewish cities in the country, there is no one synagogue there. No one, despite that. Probably before the Second World War, 1/3 of population were Jews. After the Second World War, of course, almost all of them were killed, but even after the war, Jews came from the other place because Lvov was so historical Jewish, venue, let's say. And like 10% of population were Jews, but nevertheless, there is no synagogue. But due to Mr. Gorbachev, it was possible to at least visit synagogue and try to understand what does it mean, what Jewishness means, except limitation, which I all my life had before. And I started to understand that it's not just about religious ritual, it's primarily about mindset, right? About culture, about tradition, beliefs, principles, and so on and so forth. And steadily I made a conclusion that, vast majority of what we achieved together as my partners, and almost all of them also Jews, we did because of our Jewish roots, because of our Jewish, let's say, approach, philosophy and values which we implemented to our day-to-day life.
Sorry, forgive me. So as a child, growing up in Lvov, a Jewish identity was not really related to prayer or Jewish study or a Jewish community?
Zero. There is no Jewish community.
No, that's what I mean. But if you think about the sort of fundamental elements that people talk about in terms of a Jewish identity, those three things are always different. You're saying that it was a ethnic community in that sense.
It was primarily because of, let's say, common problem of all Jews. First of all, Soviet power they defined Jews very precisely, because in the passport, I don't know, probably it was a so famously known thief graphs, where so-called nationality. Mm-hmm. So you have in the passport short word Jew, Еврей in Russian, which means a lot for your personal destiny. It should crucially impact your personal destiny. That means that you could not, for instance, be entering certain university. Just could not, because Jews was not permitted for that university. I mean, it was not official kind of prohibition. It was just informal, semi-official, but everybody knows about that. As Natan mentioned, it was clear that many of Jews would like to leave Soviet Union for Israel, and they could not do that, so-called refused it. And they, to a certain extent, discriminated in their civil rights. They effectively lost, normally, they lost their job. For instance, they could be an engineer, a doctor, they could lose their job and work as workers, for instance, because they just expressed their willingness to leave the country and, to emigrate to Israel. So it was just common destiny, common problem among the Jews. It was no synagogue, it was no prayer, it was no, I would say, education, language, or whatever, but it was common problem.
I can ask you, just stick with this identity question a little further, because people say that, that in Ukraine you could be seen as a Jew, in Russia you would get seen as Ukrainian, when you move to London you get seen as a Russian. Yeah. There's a pattern, isn't there, of being seen as somebody else.
Yeah.
How has that shaped you?
That's a very interesting topic for discussion. I, in principle, believe that Jews and Jewishness and as a phenomenon in the world is actually, I would call it, it's a society of very stubborn minorities. No, but seriously, because hundreds of peoples, within the history of nation, of ethnics, within the history of mankind, disappeared within a pretty short period of time. And Jews survived within thousands of years of history of human beings. And they survived being very clear, very distinctive minority from the majority living around. So, and I think they've got a lot of chances to join the majority. And probably many of them effectively did it, right? So they just disappeared and assimilated with the majority of it. It was very tough selection of very specific people who deliberately, consciously decided to stay as a minority. They always not agree with the majority. And by the way, that seems to be one of the sources of phenomena of resultiveness of Jews, of their kind of efficiency. Because they're always challenging common wisdom, let's say, because they always don't believe in this common wisdom. They're always ready to fight with them. But it's a long discussion.
Tell me, Natan, if we just go, just stay with this. Obviously, you talked about having, if you like, that kind of discovery of your Jewish history, that extended Jewish family, and then after that long period of imprisonment, you come to Israel. How did your relationship with that Jewish identity and Jewish community in Judaism change as an Israeli?
Okay, first of all, I have really to respond, it's connected to your question, with this anthem we just now, Michael sang to being minority. I have to say, it's true that It helped us to be very stubborn and very creative and very talented people. But in today's world, Jews don't disappear and don't assimilate because there is a state where they are majority. Mm-hmm. Because, and I know it from the experience now with all the communities of the world. We have shrinking communities, we have a lot of assimilation. And the only two anchors, the only two factors which resist to assimilation is faith and Zionism, connection to tradition and connection to the state of Israel. If there is both of them, it's okay. If it's at least one of them, there is something to work with. If you don't have this and this, your grandchildren will not be Jewish. It's true about Mexico, it's true about United States, it's true about Russia. So today, Zionism or Israel has a very special role keeping this identity. So I do agree, of course, that we as a minorities, we really, that's what made us the people that we resisted. We thanks God, there came political Zionism 100 years ago, and now we have the State of Israel, which really keeps Jews as one people. So it's, and we still are a startup nation. We still have a lot of great ideas coming from Israel, in spite of the fact that we are not minorities. So it's
No, that's an important point. It's a very important point.
Yeah, no, that's because Michael gave such a big importance to us staying as a minority. So
you're not a minority, definitely, in your own country.
Yeah.
But versus your neighbors, you're very kind of
we always will be
visible minority.
Yeah,
So therefore, that's give us a lot, give Israelis, from my point of view, a lot of aspiration.
Yeah, that's
And to resist again,
Yeah,
right?
that's true.
Because you're talking about startup nation. You know where's the vast majority of startups occurred? From army, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Why from army? Because
Absolutely.
you are in a constant fight with your neighbors.
Absolutely.
Well, let's come in a minute, but can I just ask you, just go a little further on Israel and that identity. I know that you've spoken to many communities like ours tonight here. And I know there's this perennial question about Israel's relationship with the diaspora. Is it not what it once used to be? Do you notice anything changing? Is it?
Of course, it's
How?
changing all the time. Well, first of all, I was really in a very lucky position that when we started our struggle, we had like two big allies, Israel and world Jewry. We are just now in London. I have to say, London was one of the very big and important centers of the struggle for Soviet Jewry. From what I could now see, I see Rita Ecker and June Jacobs. Rita Ecker was the head of 35, and June Jacobs was the representative of establishment organization of Soviet Jewry. Well, and Michael Sherborne is not with us, he passed away, but it was the main communication channel with all the outer world. I do know the power of diaspora in the struggle for Israel. On the other hand, without Israel, there was no core, there was no magnet, there was nothing that we could build our struggle around it. Now, when I came to Israel, it was very clear, and I first came to Jewish Agency as the activist who was fighting against Jewish Agency. I was fighting against any establishment, so against Jewish Agency. But it was very clear that they were like there are representatives of Israel and representatives of diaspora. Representatives of Israel were saving diaspora Jewry because we, Israel, we are building our common home for all the Jews. Jews will disappear, but only Israel will stay. And there was diaspora Jewry who was saving Israel. That we, rich, powerful Jews, we will not let our poor relative, our weak Israel to disappear. What happened in Shoah will not happen again, never again. So both sides were saving one another. What changed, and I think this change which goes in the last 20 years very clearly, Jews of America, and in fact Jews of diaspora, discovered that in order to keep their children Jewish, they need Israel. So Israel is not needed that we can save Israel, but we need Israel to strengthen our identity. And Israel discovers, even if some people don't want to recognize it, but that even when we are such a successful startup nation, and we are very successful, unbelievably successful country, still all the nations will put a question mark whether we have right to exist. And this will go with us all the time. And the only ally which is ours without any discussion, it's world Jewry. So today we are in the stage when Israel needs world Jewry and world Jewry needs Israel. It's very different than when we are saving world Jewry and world Jewry is saving us. So I think that is the main change. We are now much more dependent on one another because we need one another.
But the question I have, Natan, is that I think many people would say that in the diaspora Jews feel as though the concerns that are held about the nature of modern Israel, its politics, the way it handles its negotiations with the Palestinians, that they're just not heard. And likewise, you would hear from Israelis that the diaspora Jews don't understand, don't recognize the problems and the realities that Israel faces, particularly in those negotiations with the Palestinians. So is something breaking down or something getting stretched there in a way that wasn't the case 10, 30 years ago?
Yeah, well, I think that just because we are much more dependent on one another, this lack of dialogue, lack of understanding is becoming more and more critical. And no doubt on both sides, there is a lot of arrogance. And the one who is dealing with this, in fact, all my 40 years as an activist in Moscow, and then as prisoner, and then as an activist in Israel, and as minister, and now the head of Jewish Agency, I'm dealing with one thing, is bridges between diaspora and Israel. I can say, because we chose, we are one family, but each of us chose different way of survival. Israelis chose to live in the Jewish democratic state, and Jews of diaspora choose to be minority in democratic society, which encourages you to assimilate. So you have different survival strategies, and we don't understand. There is a local understanding, no doubt. When many of my friends who call themselves liberal Jews, I say call because the word liberal changed a lot from the time that I was liberal in Moscow. When today, then it was clear that liberal is the one who is for democracy, against dictatorship. Today you can be friend of all dictators in the world and call yourself liberal. So for them it is difficult to appreciate what it is to be the only democratic state in the Middle East, when all over the Middle East there are such awful things happen, and they don't give us enough credit. And more than this, as I call this student all the time, but I got thousands of such conversations. For me, as a liberal Jew, it's shame that Israel exists. So that's of course extreme point. But this feeling of being ashamed of what Israel is doing with Palestinians, it's simply not understanding at all what is the reality of the Middle East. It doesn't mean, by the way, that Israel should not be criticized. There is nothing. On the other hand, there is absolute arrogance in Israel about the fact that pluralism is the way of survival of Jews in diaspora and not the way of assimilation. And I have to say that as the one who in the last years was involved a lot with these negotiations about conversion and about the Kotel and so on, and of course I was very upset about the failure of these negotiations, but I found out that it is such things which are elementary for Jews who live in diaspora, that is our way of survival. We have to find different ways to be connected, to live among non-Jews and to feel comfortable at the same time to be Jewish. So to explain to even to Israeli minister, not speaking about people in the street, that a Reformed Jew is not the same as assimilated Jew, that it is not kind of sects which survive by destroying Judaism. It's the way of Jewish people to survive different ways. It's very difficult because they don't feel it, they don't need it, and in addition to, of course, political difficulties, coalitions, and so on, in addition to the fact that Israeli politician has to say things which his electorate is interested to hear. And as Arik Sharon was explaining me, if you want to be a successful politician, Natan, I understand your sympathy to all the Jews in the world. I also sympathetic, but Reformed Jews are not voting for you. If you'll be fighting for Reformed Jews, you will not be member of Knesset in the next Knesset, because Russian Jews sent you to Knesset. So, in addition to all these things, there is simply a lot of elementary arrogance among world Jewry about our struggle with, for peace and democracy in the Middle East, and from Israelis about the nature of pluralistic Jewish society.
Do you, Mike, can I ask you that a really sort of important and profound point, particularly this point about Israelis not fully appreciating the way in which Jews in other societies live and operate with both their Jewish identity and their identity in other communities. Do you agree with that? Do you think that's...
Yeah, in general terms, yes. I would say the following. I think that, the phenomenon of Jewry and Jewishness is based on two pillars, I would say, for the time being. I agree that there are two most important pillars, is Israel and diaspora. I think without diaspora, input of Jews in the world history would be different, right? So we are proud of what representative of Jewish diaspora contributed to the world, to humanity, to arts, to science, to whatever, right? And I think I rather agree with what Natan said, but I think the problem is probably that mutual dependence is to a certain extent diminishing. I tell you why. I not completely agree that it's mutual dependence increasing. It's rather diminishing. Why? As you said,
the mutual dependency between the diaspora
and Israel. As you said, in the beginning of Israel as a country, as a state, it was a deep dependence from the rich Jews from London or from New York and so on. Right now, as you said, it's a pretty rich country, and it's definitely pushed people in Israel to the simple idea that we could rely on ourselves. We are self-sufficient, right? We build a powerful, strong, prosperous, advanced country in many aspects, in army, in military aspects, in technology, in any direction, right? It's democracy, so that's really subject for proud of all Israelis and all Jews around them. On the other hand, as you said, initially Jews in diaspora looked at Israel as a kind of safe haven, right? So the last refuge in case if something happened in the war. And memory about Shoah was so fresh in their memory. And so all of them thought about, if something happened in this crazy world, I have at least a place where I always be treated fairly, right? World become much more tolerant for Jews, especially in a country like where we're now, in UK or US or generally in the Western country, and even in Russia and many other countries, Ukraine, it's become more tolerant. So Jews in this country not have a feeling that they are under serious threat. They feel as a normal citizen of our country. What's the reason for American Jews right now to identify himself or herself as a Jew? They don't know language, they don't follow religious ritual because it's in general trend in the world, not just for Judaism, it's more broadly for any religion. We actually do not have any discrimination or any kind of oppression or so on. Even versus what was 50 years ago, even in a country like the United States, my daughter is in Yale University right now, it's probably almost 20% of the students are Jews. 50 years ago, that was much sensitive issue. Not formally, not officially, but the British University was established just because Jews in the United States could not enter to Ivy League. So that's why they actually decided to establish British University, right? So I think right now, world might be far more friendly, and society be far more friendly and tolerant towards American Jews or British Jews, and that's a huge threat for them from point of view of assimilation, right? And that's, it seems to me, diminishing mutual dependence. Israel could survive without diaspora. And people in diaspora have a temptation to just to disappear, to become a kind of part of majority, part of to become a Brits, to become a Germans, to become a American. 70, that's a very well-known fact for whole auditorium. 70% of American Jews, I mean secular, I don't talk about Haredim, I don't talk about really religious people. 70% married mixed marriage, and I'm looking for my kind of next generation, for my kids. Of course, that's symbolically important, but not so important. They definitely will not consider they should marry Jewish lady or Jewish boy, because for them that we're living in free world. So we're far more close to where friends, Britain or in Britain or in Germany rather than because of ethnical features.
Natan, can I go back to a comment that you made, right? And actually many in the audience laughed, but I was really struck by it. The idea that you could be, claim to be as liberal as you liked, but befriend a dozen dictators. And I just wanted to talk, of your, all three of your books have been incredibly powerful. The case for democracy was one that obviously was exceptionally important in instructing, particularly the US and Washington, around the idea of promoting democracy. A week ago there was an organisation called Freedom House, which was setting out the details on whether or not democracy is progressing or regressing, and it was pointing out how many countries now seem to have stepped back from democracy. Do you feel as though a tide has turned or is turning around democracy?
I definitely feel that the free world is feels itself much less obligated to link the questions of democracy and human rights with the global politics. But in fact, it always was a problem. The fact that America did link the human rights with the foreign policy, it was in the times of, Carter tried and failed, and then Reagan really did it, and Margaret Thatcher did it to some extent in Europe. It was against this tide of realpolitik. So unfortunately, realpolitik is the normal way of life of the world, and returning back to the ideas that the real peace should be built on the principles of human rights and democracy is, unfortunately, it's like a rare, strange idea. But again, we see in history how the peace, which is built on agreements with dictators, can be saved only by strength of our army. It cannot be saved by some kind of mutual agreement between the peoples. And that's why I do believe that each time when the West fails to support human rights activists under totalitarian regimes, or doesn't express any solidarity with the people who go to fight for their freedom, like in Iran, it's a big failure for the free world.
But Natan, what do you say though? I mean, look, I think a lot of people will understand that sentiment, but they will be much more nervous now. I think your book came out in 2004. Nearly 15 years on, people will be much more nervous about the idea of the West supporting protesters, even those protesters making the case for freedom, having seen what happened around the Arab Spring, having seen what happened in Israel's neighborhood. And of course in the wake of Iraq and Afghanistan, has your view of that changed? The West's capacity to enable democracy, has that changed?
Look, as I explained in the case of democracy, and as our history in the Soviet Union is a good example of it, there is nobody expects of the free world to send armies to bring democracy. There is no way to bring the democracy from outside. But because under dictatorships, majority of people under dictatorships are double thinkers, are people who are suffering from this ideology. And the more these dictatorships exist, the more people are not true believers but double thinkers. And they are looking for the way to get rid of this double thinking. It's a very uncomfortable way of life. And so the dictators who have to control all the time all these people don't have enough energy, don't have enough strength to keep it if the world is not cooperating with them. That's why, by the way, what gave opportunity to Soviet dissidents like Andrei Marik to predict 25 years before Soviet Union fell. They said, in the end, if only the free world will stop giving energy to Soviet Union will fall apart. And that's what, by the way, what I was writing, and all the democratic dissidents in the Middle East were with me. But I was writing that Mubarak and Assad will fall because these people, Syrian, not American, Syrian people and Egyptian people hate Mubarak. And I remember a friend of mine, one of the leaders in Eastern Europe, came from Iran and said, in 2004, and he said, you know, Iran is like Soviet Union the last year. I said, what do you mean? He said, everybody officially hates America, and in the personal talks in the market, everybody loves America. So that's exactly why. Because America was against those leaders. By the way, in Egypt in those days, everybody hated America because America was supporting Mubarak. So all what the West has to do, or the free world has to do, to stop supporting them. Nobody asked Obama to send army to Iran, but he had to say, free world is fully with you, when billions of people were on America. What free world said? Free world said, we don't want change of a regime, we want engagement with the regime. So that is the problem.
But Natan, I think that many people didn't see pseudo-democracy coming. We thought that when you said, you know, these people will fall, these regimes will fall, they will be replaced by democracy.
No,
No.
I never said that they will be replaced by democracy. I can tell you, there was a big debate. I together with Václav Havel, we organized a big meeting of democratic dissidents in Prague in 2007. And I convinced Bush, who was like great book agent of my book. Unfortunately, he didn't succeed in other things, he succeeded in selling the book. So I convinced him to come to Prague. And he was speaking there. And Saadettin Ibrahim, the Egyptian dissident, who spent 3 years in prison, exactly as we in the Soviet Union, for the same things, and was out of the prison only because of pressure of Bush. But he challenged Bush. He said, why are you supporting Mubarak? He said, because if it will not be Mubarak, it will be Muslim Brothers, and we don't want. And Saadettin Ibrahim told him, that's a mistake. If the only option is Mubarak or Muslim Brothers, in the end it will be Muslim Brothers, because people will not permit forever to Mubarak to rule. So you have to understand, you have to be open to the democratic option. So nobody can predict what regime will be after this. But if consistently the free world always will be on the side of those who are for civil society, in the end, because of the different developments, they will strengthen. The problem is that the free world all the time is looking who is the next dictator to be loyal to us. He has to be dictator because otherwise he will not control his own people. And he has to be corrupt in order to be our dictator. And that's all the policy.
So tell me,
that's how we built our family.
so tell me, what is Russia today?
What is Russia? Look, I was
going to say,
I was activist of two movements, human rights movement and Jewish movement. As the activist of human rights movement, I can't say anything good about Putin. As the activist of Jewish movement, I have to say, for the first time, for 1,000 years of Russian history, we have a Russian leader who loves Jews. He is not friend of democracy. He is not good in terms of policy in Syria and Iran. He loves Jews. It happens so. And for him, Israel is a Russian-speaking Jewish country. Well, it doesn't help us with Iran.
Michael?
You know what, being acting Russian businessman, I probably abstain of making any assessment of political life in Russia. But I would, first of all, I agree with Natan. So we are living in a country where Russia, for the time being, is probably the most tolerant society toward Jews within the whole history of this country. And
I spoke about Putin, I don't know about society. Yes.
no, it's actually changes in society as well.
Yeah. But can I ask you both then, before we open up to questions, I want to ask you one question that we possibly wouldn't have asked a few years ago. How then do you also see politics in the United States? Do you see politics in the United States? What do you feel about the presidency of Donald Trump?
Well, I think his decision about Jerusalem was historical and very important decision. Whether he has consistent policy on other issues, we have to see.
Michael?
I think actually, from point of view of economical policy, he made a lot of progress just recently.
Really?
Yes. Implementing this new tax legislation, which is, I think, big incentives for the growing of the economy, and we are estimating fast growth of American economy for coming future. Regarding politics, I would say it's to a certain extent very controversial, at least from, let's say, media point of view. And I'm not American, definitely, but I think he, maybe a bit exotic way, it's reflecting certain big trend in the world policy.
Pro-Trump opinions in NW3, plurality exists. It's a great evening to be here. Listen, I'd like to open up and ask some questions. I appreciate that asking you to pose short questions is rather like Gianotti asking for some short questions, so forgive me, I ask long ones, but could you keep yours relatively short? There's not just a gentleman here, but my rabbi. So, and Jacob Rothschild. So hold on, Stuart, 1 second. Yeah.
Thank you, James. My congregant, I'll see you in Shul this year. What a pleasure. Natan, we go way back. You've been an inspiration.
Sorry, this is Rabbi Stuart Altshuler. Sorry, I should say that. Yeah.
You, as you know how I feel about you.
Question.
I have a question. My question is this. You wrote in a tremendous book I refer to often, Fear No Evil. I'd like to ask both of you what you fear today the most.
Thank you. Michael, why don't you start?
I would say that, as always, our problem is extension of our achievements. I think that development of technology could reach a level where it would be really more dangerous for the future of the world. I think the world become more and more fragile, and power of individual is growing, which is great. But to control this power become more and more problematic. So I think we are facing definitely times, whereas the whole world would be kind of depend on the kind of what in the sick brain of some mad people. Who knows?
Natan?
Well, in the most abstract way, my fear is about arrogance. Israel and Jewish people have two big challenges. One is Iran, and one is dialogue between Israel and the diaspora Jewry. In the first case, arrogance of the world. In the second case, arrogance between us ourselves. That's
Interesting, okay. Further questions? Sorry. Yes, stay down right before. You say the names.
I'm Rabbi Jana Klausner. I would love you to show
all the
off.
Reformed rabbis are from
Yeah.
What's the answer? I think we're in JW3. Mikhail, I would love you to show off about Genesis. I sit on the advisory board, and in Britain we're not yet used to Genesis. Please tell us about Genesis, both the prize and this. And I'm sure quite a lot of people here are thinking, oh, Genesis, how could I apply to that? Why do we want to put Genesis on the map here?
For the same reason, because the main purpose of, the main goal for Genesis is to build Jewish identity. Maybe some other form rather than it was before, less traditional form. Because historically, traditionally, Jewish identity was built on a religion. We are living in a world where the religion, unfortunately, losing impact, right? So therefore, they're trying to find a way how to restore this identity for Jews, because that seems to be very important for the world. Thank you very much.
As the father of this lady was the only politician in the world who in the end of 60s and the beginning of 70s was reaching us by telephone almost every week.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Igor Zinkov. I'm not a rabbi, but I am a rabbinical student.
That's right, he's on the first row.
So,
You're branching moving forward.
yeah, and also we share the same native language, so здравствуйте, спасибо. I'd like to ask you the question. Recently I started a project in London for Russian-speaking Jews. And do you think that there is a future for Russian-speaking Jews in the world? Not just in Russian-speaking countries.
No, of course, it is a future for Russian-speaking Jews, first of all, in a country where the Russian is a native language, right? Like Russia or many other places. But I think we are focusing on the Russian-speaking Jews primarily because it's a very specific Jewish society. As you know, Russian-speaking Jews were effectively isolated from the religion within almost 70 years or 80 years. So therefore, for them to join Jewish tent, I would say, would be much more difficult because kind of the backbone, the pivotal role of Jewishness is religion. So therefore, we decided that for us, as a Russian-speaking Jews, as a people who grew up in that environment, it would be quite natural and reasonable to focus on building a special program which allowed for the people who came from the secular family without having any tradition, any knowledge about Judaism, any knowledge about kind of holidays and rituals and things like that, anyway, to join Jewish society and to become proud Jews. So that was the idea of Genesis.
Can I address also this question a little bit with an analogy? A few years ago, I came to Alan Finkielkraut, a French Jewish philosopher, and it's when just big wave of Aliyah from France started. And I asked him, does he think that there is future for French Jews in France? And he said, I don't know, but my problem is much bigger than yours. My problem is there is future for France in France. And then I told him, you can be sure there is always future for France in Israel. So I want to say there is always future for Russian Jews in Israel.
Yes, there's a gentleman over here. Do wave me. Thank you very much. Sir.
Do you feel that the democracy, my name is Michael Fridman, do you think the democracy as we've known it for the last 100 years is beginning to fail us and we are going to be replaced with Putinism, Trumpism and even Macron to a certain extent because they are seen to get things done, rubber stamped by our parliament, as opposed to the long procrastination, asking millions of people the same question and nothing happening?
Natan.
Well, I don't know, I'm not a historian, but I think that this struggle always was taking place. This idea that we have to ask the people on one hand, and on the other hand we must have Supreme Court and other institutions which will not let the majority to take it to the extremes. It existed always, the struggle is at this very moment. We have big struggle. Where are exactly the borders between these three powers, legislative, executive, and the court in Israel? I don't think that it means any crisis of failure of democracy. That's from the very beginning, and I had to say, to American Revolution, there were thinkers who then were thinking a lot about it. But I think we are in the same situation of uncertainty as they were then. Nobody can say exactly where this border between these powers has to be crossed. The real threat is when in Europe it's for sure, but also in the free world, when you decide that your identity is not important for freedom, to the contrary, your identity is a problem. Let's live in the world without nations, religions, and identities. And then you find out that this free world cannot resist to those waves of non-democratic waves which are coming from the other place.
May I just a few words? I think that it's very kind of popular topic for discussion, whether it's the end of democracy, what's happened with many countries. And I think actually I agree with what Natan's saying. I don't think it's the end of democracy. And of course, there's endless friction between, kind of different branch of power for sphere of their responsibility. But also, it seems to me, we are the witnesses of the changing of the trend from point of view of globalization. Because it seems to me within the last, a few dozens of years, it was a common feeling that globalization is kind of linear process, right? So the people become closer to each other, and the whole country, become, more dependent, more mixed, and more mixture, and so on and so forth. I think that is a mistake. I think globalization is a cyclical process. I think right now we enter into a new cycle for a number of reasons. It's a long conversation about that, but primarily about changing in technology and so on, where actually, it's an obvious trend for a certain extent self-isolation. It doesn't mean that it's forever. That's, of course, again, just a certain part of
Self-isolation or national isolation?
I mean, national isolation, which is, by the way, to a certain extent, Trump policy, there's repercussion of this, and then Brexit is also a repercussion of this trend, and many other aspects, So I think that we are just changing of the phase of the cycle.
Okay. All right, there's a gentleman who I can only assume is at the very early stages of his rabbinic studies. He's right at the back.
So I have to apologize to everyone for copying what everybody said, but I'm also a new rabbi here in London.
No. There may be a supply and demand problem with rabbinic.
I actually wanted to steal the show. So I was actually born in Ukraine, and I'm a new rabbi here in London, and what I wanted to ask you was, what advice can you give to people like us who are trying to now make a difference to the Jewish people and also the Russian Jewish people?
Who wants to go first? Natan. Good luck.
Very simple. Well, be proud of your past, stick to your future, be close to Israel, be proud of Israel, that's all.
No, I think actually Russian-speaking Jews, talking about them, is by far more should be driven by soft power rather than purely kind of religious incentives or kind of religious tradition.
I speak to religious students.
But I think religious students should be accommodated in the modern world, right? To be efficient in the modern world. So I think to find the best way, have to utilize this soft power, cultural things, values, some informal way of understanding and explanation of what does it mean Jewishness in modern form would be extremely efficient for Russian-speaking Jews, right? And not just for them, more generally.
There's a lady here. Actually, there are two ladies. You know what I might? Oh my! Here we go now. There's a lady here, just on the left-hand side with her pinkish, peachy scarf.
I'm not a rabbi.
Certainly not.
And maybe this is a stupid question, but I have always felt, and I've had a very great life here, no problems at all, I've always felt that any Jew that doesn't have a suitcase packed in their head is killing themselves. And I just wanted to know whether I'm just a very pessimistic person, or whether, do you think the world is getting safer or more dangerous, given the kind of feelings about Israel, Palestine, Jerusalem, all of those, and the crossover between anti-Semitism and anti-Israel?
Thank you. Carlos, before I ask you to reply, there's a lady just, excuse me, madam, there's a lady just over there. I just want to make sure we get a few questions, so I'll do two at a time, if I may. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Ada. I'm a Russian Jewish American living in London now, and just to say that, Natan, you have always been a huge inspiration to me. I actually met you on my first ever trip to Israel, and I will never forget that small meeting that we had. But my question is on BDS. I'm quite concerned about it, the strength of it, the strength on university campuses here and in the United States. And just wanted to get your take on it. How bad is it? What is being done from the Jewish agency's perspective in terms of fighting it? And also for you, Mikhail, is there anything that the Genesis Group is doing, and anything that you think from your kind of business side that we can do to help address that?
Okay, great. We literally just want to answer both questions. So on the Michael, why don't we do for anti-Semitism? I'll ask you Michael and BDS.
Okay, let me. First of all, I don't know. I'm sorry for you living with this feeling on the suitcase. Why to live with this? Simply make a liand. Second, I don't know. Probably the world, not Israel, but the world in general, becoming more and more dangerous place because of what's happening with Iran, because of what's happening with North Korea, because of what's happening. But you cannot escape to one or another country. From this point, globalization does make us to think about one world. But one thing I'm saying, also as a head of Jewish agency, and before, and even when our politicians don't agree with me, I don't agree with this, that each time when there is terrorist attack and so on, immediately our politicians say to Jews of France or Jews of other country, go to Israel immediately. And then they turn to me and say, how it is that you, the head of Jewish agency, don't say them, go to Israel immediately. Not because I don't want you to go to Israel, simply I don't believe that Jews are such people who, when they hear the voice of Commissar of Zionism, go to Israel, they go to Israel. And I don't, and especially after terrorist attacks, I don't want that people will feel that Israel is kind of shelter. Because if it is shelter, then Miami is also shelter, and maybe even better. I think we are at the stage when what connects people to Israel is Jewish identity, the pride for being part of this family, the pride in our unique history and our unique achievements today. And that's what I want you to live with, not with the feeling that you must be on the suitcase, but the feeling of special pride of belonging to these people and being connected to this country, which has such tremendous impact on everything. And now coming to BDS.
BDS.
No, it's okay, it's okay.
Then Michael. Look, BDS is a huge problem, but not in terms of boycotting of Israel. For our economy, it's not existent. For our cultural relations, not existent. It's huge problem in terms of how it influences on young generation on the campuses. Today we have 500,000 of young Jews in American universities, and I visited more than 100 campuses in the last 15 years. And I participated in many debates and so on. And I see how really our opponents, if not to say enemies, are successful in bringing this feeling of uncertainty, whether that really it's not good for my career. It's not good for my success. It's not good for my life to be publicly connected, associated in any way with Israel. And that is the danger, really. And we have to fight it. First time when I saw it in 2003, I came to Ariel Sharon, and after my traveling during the second Intifada, in the middle of the terrorists killing 10, 20 Jews every day, not only Jews, Israelis, in our cities. And we are fighting, and I'm in the cabinet. Every day we are discussing how to fight and not to endanger the civil population. And we are coming to campuses, and Jews one after another saying me how they are ashamed of their connection to Israel, how it is bad for their career. When one girl from postgraduate of a business school of Harvard tells me, I wanted very much to sign this letter for Israel, but I knew that for three professors from whom my career depends, they will not like it. And they decided that for a few years I'll be silent until I make my career. So she is the one who said it, but how many think about it? And that's not happening in Moscow in the 70s. That's happening today in the centers of the free world. That is very alarming. I can say the Jewish Agency, then in those days I started, not being Jewish Agency, when I came to Jewish Agency, I continued it. We now have almost 100 special shlichim. By the way, in this hall now there are 9 of our shlichim. Shlichim, it is emissaries of Israel to youth movements, to synagogues, and now we started to campuses, and we went from 0 to 100 in a few years. The aim of these Israeli fellows on campus is, of course, to bring more young Jews to Israel, different experiences, to bring more Israel to the campus, but the most important, to build a core of young Jews who are not ashamed, who are not afraid to have an open debate in dialogue, because when it comes to open debate, all the logical arguments are on our side. By the way, now we have 2 of our shlichim on the campuses in Britain.
Thank you. Michael. So, first of all, with all my respect to Israel, because I am a citizen of Israel, I do not think that it's the best idea that all Jews will live in Israel. I think that...
Let's start from 50%, right? Now we have 44, let's come to 50.
Even 50, that would be too crowded.
That's what they were saying before 1 million Jews came from Russia. There was no place in Israel for Russian Jews.
Correct. So, but I would say that, seriously, I think that for Jews living in the diaspora, I think we're destined in their own hand. We should build their life to feel safe and to feel kind of comfortable in the country we are living. And I think it will be big, I would say, loss for the world in case if, for instance, British Jewish community or Russian Jewish community will disappear. That's a great loss for the world. I think that would be really bad things. So I'm sure that it would be in mutual interest, Israel and diaspora, if it will be a strong diaspora with a strong Israel as a country. So number 2, so I think, and actually I have a whole article regarding that topic, the problem, and to a certain extent it's connected with the BDS problem, the problem of this deviation, a mutual misunderstanding between diaspora and Israel, as you mentioned, that's arrogance and not enough attention, not enough patience to listen to each other, right? So you're right, Israel facing their own problem and understand and making their own solution how to treat this problem. And people living in diaspora, in the US or here in the UK, to a certain extent looking for this problem closer to their own citizen, right? So the same view as their own citizen looking for that, sometimes. And the main problem, it seems to me, there is no public and legitimate forum for exchanging of mind between diaspora and the authority of Israel and society of Israel. There is no legitimate forum, which is shame, it seems to me, right? And we understand completely that at the end of the day, decision-making process in Israel, in the hand of Israelis. But I think, take into consideration history of Jews and, importance of diaspora. I think at least voice of diaspora should be listened carefully. And for that, it should be, Israel should be incentivized to build appropriate, visible, legal, and respectful forum for that particular changing of this map. So,
ladies and gentlemen, forgive me, something tells me that the conversation has just begun, it has not ended, and it probably won't end when we draw this part of the evening to a close. But I do want to make sure that people who I'd hope to get away by 8 could at least get away by 8:30. And so I hope you will. I hope you will stay around, talk amongst yourselves. Make sure you come and have a chance to say hello to Michael and to Natan. But most importantly, we don't get an evening like this often. I suspect it will be one that we will remember for many, many years to come. It is a huge thing for us, and we're enormously grateful to you, Michael, and to you, Natan. Ladies and gentlemen, Mike Fridman and Natan Sharansky.